Rob, yes, absolutely. In a quick word, yes. He is absolutely done. He represents the old guard of the Republican Party, the Republican establishment of 2015 and prior, which believed in corporatist globalism. And he does not understand, or at least does not want to understand, the America First Party, the workers' movement that the GOP of the 2020s has become, largely because of this trend. If Mitch McConnell were more politically astute, he would still be the majority leader if he had simply passed what the president wanted to pass, and what could certainly have been legislatively done in terms of stimulus aid before those Georgia elections. At least one, if not both, of those Georgia Republicans would have been reelected. Instead, because of his obstruction and because of his inability, really, his incompetence in terms of leading the Senate, he is now minority Mitch. And frankly, he deserves to be minority Mitch.
Yeah, Kristen, it's interesting. We forget about that. Those special elections in Georgia, before that was happening, you were on the show. We were saying, geez, Mitch McConnell could be the most powerful guy in Washington. Now he's a footnote.
That's exactly right. And just to piggyback off what Steve just said, there's been a lot of talk in the media over the last year about this divide within the Republican Party. When you actually talk to voters, GOP voters, there's no divide amongst them. Trump fundamentally changed what the GOP actually stands for and turned it into a much more populist party for blue-collar, working, tax-paying people. The divide is among our representatives, our GOP representatives in Washington, many of whom are totally out of touch with where the party's at right now and what their voters want. The people who are at home watching this impeachment sham, they're fed up. Frankly, they're bored. That goes for people on both sides of the aisle. We want to see progress. We want to see Trump's agenda that he ran on successfully in 2016. That's what we want to see the Republicans in Washington continue fighting for. But instead, these people like Mitch McConnell continue falling into the Democrats' trap.
Yeah, Amir, we saw Bill Cassidy, senator from Louisiana. He was swayed by the arguments on Tuesday. Do you think that the Democratic House managers swayed any other Republican senators yesterday with their presentation?
Well, I would hope not. I mean, it's possible they've been going for this sort of visceral, emotional appeal, not the sort of rational, logical, let's apply the legal standard. Did any of his statements over the last 2 months amount to constitutionally unprotected incitement? And did that incitement, in fact, cause, that's the second step, what happened on January 6th. If we focus on those two issues, which I hope Donald Trump's team will focus on, and those get into the factual details, then hopefully any persuasion from the sort of emotional and appeal to passions from the videos from the House managers will be neutralized.
Yeah. Liz Mayer, nice to see you again, GOP strategist, back with us here on the show. Liz, I want to play a soundbite from Stacey Plaskett. She represents the Virgin Islands. I want to play this, and then we can talk about it. Take a listen.
When discussing how to carry guns into D.C., one noted, quote, "Yes, it's illegal, but this is war. And we are clearly in a post-legal phase of our society."
Now, Plaskett, she represents the Virgin Islands, not a voting member. The date on that Washington Post article is, and this is important, is January 5th, the day before the riots. Basically, I had to look. I said, she's a Democrat, right? Yes, she is. Because it just seemed like she was making the Trump defense team's argument that this was pre-planned. And my question to you is, if this was pre-planned, this riot, which none of us condone, but if this was pre-planned, how could he have incited the violence?
Well, I think that there are a number of specific legal questions there that would have to be answered. And if you were in a trial setting, clearly, I think you would have a lot more attention to detail. I think it's fair to say that Democrats aren't necessarily covering this off quite as well as they should be in terms of, not calling witnesses, for example. But I think the point that would broadly be made here, if you were looking at it from the perspective of somebody who does favor impeachment and who does think that incitement occurred, is that ultimately you had this whole ramp up and you had a whole series of statements and a whole series of things that the president was doing that pushed people over the edge on January 6th, and that his speech that occurred on January 6th, and then in addition, his failure to do things as the riot was playing out and as he was hearing about that, frankly, from phone calls with senators, right? I mean, we heard last night about this phone call that he had with Tommy Tuberville, where Tommy Tuberville literally was saying they've just escorted the vice president into a safe bunker, essentially. I think that's the issue here, is that there was this ramp up, and it's not just one specific statement that the president made, it's a whole series of statements over a period of time. But I certainly agree that Democrats aren't handling this as well as I would like them to be, given what I feel that I saw and given what the rest of the country saw as a ramp up. Right. I think they could be doing a much better job of this in terms of prosecuting the case, but that's not necessarily their priority.
Steve, let's jump in.
To this point, though, are you saying that these statements, meaning the president's statements, I assume what you mean are the president's statements conveying his significant skepticism regarding the November 3rd vote, are you saying that those statements are not allowed, that we should somehow be criminalizing, or that it is impeachable for him to voice what he and tens of millions of Americans believe?
No, and I think that frankly, I think it's interesting that you're trying to move the ball here. I think it's interesting that you're trying to move the ball here by conflating what is legitimate First Amendment covered speech with something that is not First Amendment covered speech. Incitement is not First Amendment covered speech. And what you're talking about and what you're trying to point to here and deflect by pointing to here is actually very different to the point that I'm making and to the point that people who do favor impeachment here are making.
Steve, your response?
Well, I just want to jump in and say,
I'm not deflecting at all.
Hold on. Hang on, Amir.
You're actually trying to take something specific that we're talking about and suggest that you're talking about something wholly different, that it actually protects speech.
Liz, let me clear the deck here. Steve, you have the floor.
What statements are you talking about from President Trump that are impeachable? What statements?
I think if you're looking at things like, you had the comments about go there, get wild, fight harder, everything to do with fight and needing to fight much harder when you had people.
Kidding me? Every political.
No, I'm not kidding you.
If we're going to go based on that premise.
Hang on a second. Panel, hang on. We can only have one person talk at a time. Hey, Liz, hold on.
Terms like fight.
Statements like that.
Kristen, hold on one sec. Kristen, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Every politician nearly has made statements like that. Take back our country.
No, not in that context.
Hold on, Liz.
Not.
We let you. Liz, hold on one sec. Kristen, go ahead.
Politicians accountable. If this is the new standard, then was Bernie Sanders responsible for the crazed loon who went and shot up Republicans, including?
Actually, Republicans have argued he was. Republicans have argued he was. Plenty of conservatives have. And on this exact channel, just on Tuesday, we were talking about the odiousness of Maxine Waters' statements and how she should be held accountable for that. So actually, yes, I think you are applying a double standard here. Yes.
You're going down a very dangerous path if we're going to say that the new standard is that any politician cannot say fight for your country, take your country back.
That's not the standard.
The kind of language.
Again, you're taking specific things he said and twisting them and saying that that's not what he said. You're moving the ball.
But here's something fascinating.
You qualify as incitement. You haven't said one thing.
I actually have said several things. You've just glossed over them, and I think people would be well served by going and Googling this. There was a whole PolitiFact piece on this that I think people should go and look at. There have been a number of pieces that have been done that have laid out very specifically everything that was said, everything that was tweeted in the run-up to January 6th. I'm sorry you're not familiar with that, but those of us who are watching it on the day and in the days in the run-up to January 6th are extremely familiar with it. And ultimately, the Senate's going to have to make a call on this. Impeachment is a political act. This is not a criminal trial. I would prefer it as if the Democrats were conducting it as a criminal trial, but they're not. And the fact of the matter is